When I ask people, what are you expecting from disclosure? What we find is that for many people, it means the official acknowledgement of our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. In other words, they want to see an acknowledgement, not just on BBC and CNN, but they want to see it from the Kremlin. They want to see it from the White House. The first really official acknowledgement was in the year 2013, and this was at the National Press Club. It was called the Citizen Hearings on UFO Disclosure. 7 corporations own all the major media in the West. There are things in our skies that we don't know what they are, but don't worry, because we'll protect you. So the military is taking a stance, at least publicly, that looking at this as a threat. Today, I want to talk to you about disclosure. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the ongoing disclosure of information regarding our relationship to technology from beyond this world, to life from beyond this world, and to contact from that life with us in the past and present. And I have to be specific when I talk about disclosure. I was recently at an event. There was a question that came up from the audience. I was on stage, and someone asked me to speak about disclosure, and someone else, and a woman in another part of the office, she said, well, disclosure of what? And was not aware of the efforts that are ongoing right now through the mass media to condition the population of the world to accept the revelations that are now being made in one form or another of our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. It's a complex topic. It's not new. It's been going on for a long time. And this is one of the interesting things about disclosure. When I ask people, what are you expecting from disclosure? What we find is that for many people, it means the official acknowledgement of our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. In other words, they want to see an acknowledgement, not just on BBC and CNN, but they want to see it from the Kremlin. They want to see it from the White House. I don't know that that's going to happen in that way. Disclosure itself has been happening for a long time on many different levels. And just depends on what it is that you're expecting to see, what you believe in terms of what you're being shown, because obviously there's a narrative around the disclosure, not just the fact that disclosure is happening, but how the narrative is being driven. So these are things I want to talk to you about today. What is disclosure? What does it mean? What are the implications? What's the big deal? I've had young people come up to me at some of our events and say, what is the big deal? You know, we all know that we're not alone in the universe. So let me just kind of break this down a little bit. First of all, this will probably be part one of at least a 2-part series, because there's so many facets of disclosure. And I think many of you know that for over 40 years of my adult life, I have been blessed to lead people into some of the most isolated and remote and pristine and magnificent and beautiful places remaining in the world today for the archaeological sites that we find there. But also because of the indigenous people that preserve the wisdom that we find in those archaeological sites. So I'll be clear, I have not been with every indigenous tradition, everywhere on the planet. Every indigenous tradition that I have ever been with allows for a relationship between them, their people, their communities, and a greater family in the cosmos, what they call their space family, their space brothers and sisters, or whatever. And it's more than just a reference to them. There's an interaction that happens, especially when I go into the Andes of southern Peru. I spend a lot of time leading groups into the Tibetan plateau, the 12 monasteries and 2 nunneries over 26 days, and the Tibetan people, among others. And the point is that they all allow for these relationships between us and a greater intelligence, an ongoing relationship that began a long time ago. It's only in the West where we, in the past, may have had a problem. And I say in the past because I believe that we are in the process of being conditioned. We have been since I was a kid, of accepting on a deeper level our relationship to intelligence from beyond this world. If you're old enough to remember, some of the first science fiction programs that came out in the late 50s and early 60s, on black and white television, and some of the first Star Treks that came out, and Lost in Space, with an AI intelligent robot that used to wave his arms around and say, "Danger, Will Robinson, danger, Will Robinson," and we laugh about those, but those were early efforts to begin conditioning the general population to think differently about ourselves and our relationship with the world. And so you say, well, why would we need to think differently? Well, I'm going to begin with that. It all comes down to, there were a couple of studies that were done. They were done back in the early 1960s, and then they were published later in the 60s, about what it would mean to us. How would it impact society and civilization to know that we're not all that there is, that the world doesn't revolve around us, that there's something else out there? And a couple of these think tanks, they did some really interesting research. One of them is the RAND Corporation. I know some of you are familiar with them. Another one is the Brookings Institute. The RAND Corporation, these are private organizations. And I'm looking over here. I don't have a formal PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to reference some notes for accuracy, and I want to give you some direct quotes. I wanted to put this out quickly so that we could build on this because of some of the things that are happening in the news cycles that are coming around over the next few days, next couple of weeks. I wanted you to have a little bit of a context from my perspective, because you've asked for that. So these are private think tanks, private corporations that consult with the authorities, with U.S. military, with governments all over the world. And the RAND Corporation was interesting because when they were asked about their positions, they denied that they had done any work or any reference or any acknowledgement of intelligence from beyond our world. And finally, through enough asking, I think it's through Freedom of Information could have played a role in this, they acknowledged an internal memo. It was dated November 27, 1968, where they developed a memo, and it was broken down into a number of different parts. Part 5 is actually called UFOs, How to Proceed and Why. So it shows us the RAND Corporation was looking into this, and they gave all kinds of scenarios about what could happen, and if these things happened, what it would mean. It was kind of like a fault tree. If this, then that. If this, then that. So I'm just sharing this because it goes to show they were being asked to explore this and to think about it. I think the really important one, and probably the one that had the greatest impact, was from the Brookings Institute. This is from 1962, and I'm going to read directly from this. I want to get this right. And what they were doing, the Brookings Institute, was taking case histories from anthropological studies here on Earth. What did it mean to societies that had been cut off from the rest of the world? So these are tribes that were, and again, this is back in the 60s. And these were new tribes that were being found in primarily in South America and Africa, or in the Pacific, on islands that had been cut off from the rest of the world. And by being cut off, this is the important thing, that they were absolutely certain of their place in the world and of their place in the cosmos. They had they were very entrenched in an idea of who they were and where they were with relation to the rest of the cosmos. Now, we're not cut off from one another, but as a society, this applies to us. We have been conditioned to be very certain, very human-centric about who we are and our relationship to the world. Now, there have always been people, and maybe in your family and certainly in my family, we've always acknowledged that, the universe is a big place. And as Carl Sagan said, it would be a terrible waste of space if we're all that there is, and we know that they're not. As a scientist, I have studied the archaeological, the anthropological evidence, the fossil records. I'm going to begin talking about those in some of the other programs. So I've always been very open to the idea, and for me, it wasn't a problem. It's never been a problem for me. But let me share with you why it was a problem, according to people at the Brookings Institute, and how this thinking led to the hiding of information that was coming out in the 20th century. So here's a direct quote from the Brookings Institute. It says, anthropological files contain many examples of societies that were sure of their place in the universe. So this is what I was just mentioning, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies espousing different ideas and different life ways, others that survived such an experience. So some of them disintegrated. They ceased to exist as a society. Those that did continue their societies, those that survived such an experience usually did so by paying a very high price of changes in values and attitudes and behaviors. So this is the official thinking back in the 1960s when it comes to the public revelation of what was happening with crash sites, with recoveries, not just in the United States, but these were happening all over the world. Recently, we're finding as far back as 1933, a vehicle, an extraterrestrial vehicle had crashed in Italy during the rule of Mussolini and was given to the U.S. because of our relationship with them at the time and the technical expertise. In the cultural traditions of all those places that I mentioned previously, from the Andes Mountains and the Tibetans, they've always had records, written records, oral traditions, and in some cases have actually harbored the occupants of the vehicles that have crashed or landed on Earth among the indigenous populations, and they have learned from them and communicated with them over a period of many years and developed their cosmology based upon those relationships. So I'm going to talk about that more in another video. What I want to talk to you about right now is the disclosure itself, the way it's happening, how it's being presented to us, and what it may mean, and what the concerns are about that. So there is a process. It's a concerted process that is becoming a little bit more apparent, certainly in the news cycles recently. And I say recently because as far back, some of you remember, I mean, for me, the first really high-level official disclosure, there were always rumors and there were whistleblowers and there were leaks, all through from World War II and development of nuclear weapons, up into the present. That's always been happening. The first really official acknowledgement was in the year 2013, and this was at the National Press Club. It was called the Citizen Hearings on UFO Disclosure. Stephen Greer, many of you know who Stephen Greer is. I interviewed with him for a film that he did last year. Interestingly, he and his staff felt that my part of the interview did not fit into the film, so it wasn't included. But I interviewed with him. They came to me here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'm saying this because I had the opportunity to spend an evening with Stephen Greer and talk to him. Very interesting guy, very interesting perspectives. He was the one that was driving this National Press Club, largely driving the National Press Club that happened in 2013. So what happened there? Well, it was just that. National Press Club, representatives from many different publications came to hear the testimony under oath of retired military, of engineers, of scientists from around the world who had the experiences and seen the evidence. And during the time, and again, it was a different time, World War II, mid-20th century, the Cold War was happening, and many of them were under non-disclosure agreements. So they had signed documents saying you can't talk about this stuff. Having worked in the defense industry during the Cold War, I know exactly what this is. All of our jobs were very compartmentalized. In other words, I was working on software, and I had no idea what my software was being used for. We would receive code. My team, we would receive a section of software of code. We didn't know what had happened prior to that, and we didn't know where our code was going to go. Our job was to take the input and make that input perform in a certain way for output, and then it went to another team in another isolated compartment. They were called vaults, and they literally were vaults. So very compartmentalized, and that's how you keep secrets. And it works actually very well. And so a lot of the people that were testifying had been in compartmentalized projects where they had either seen directly or they had heard from other people that were working with them, on these projects on the military bases and things like that. So that was 2013. And, it just kind of fell where it fell. The national media really didn't pick it up. You didn't hear much about it on mainstream, legacy, cable network news, or if you did, it was poked fun at. There were jokes. Late night TV, Little Green Men, all the jokes that just trying to discount the whole thing and shed doubt on the credibility of what was happening here. Things kicked into high gear in 2021, September of 21. The Department of Defense, DoD, released actual footage. Now we're moving from the point of just speaking about it. Now we're actually seeing something, although still no physical data other than the visual. So it's more than oral testimony. So the DoD released the footage of it was a UAP. They changed it from UFO, and now it's been renamed to UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. And that was September of 21. And then there was a period of time where the dust kind of settled from that. It was assimilated. It was whatever it was. Now we go into high gear. April of 23, the Pentagon now is releasing additional footage of 2 UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. That's April of this year. Now, May, the next month, May 18th, Gary Nolan, Stanford scientist, comes out and he states in mainstream media, confirms that non-humans have visited the Earth. Now, our indigenous ancestors have always said that, but this is someone that is believed to be credible in the academic world, in the scientific world, is saying this, and it is being picked up on mainstream media. You are seeing this across the legacy media. Okay, that's May 18th. June 3rd, Newsweek comes out. Okay, now it gets official. If it's on the cover of a magazine, it's official, okay? Newsweek comes out and says an intel officer, Christopher Mellon, has stated that these things are happening and that reverse engineering, so he's saying reverse engineering has happened. What does that mean? Reverse engineering is when we have a technology and we tear it apart to figure out how it works so that we can recreate that technology. That's the reverse engineering. You tear it down and you have to understand all the components. And if those components are based on technologies that aren't known yet, it can take years to understand how those components are working. So you are going from a finished product backward to understand the nature of the mechanism. Now you can recreate this. So what Mellon is saying is that reverse engineering has happened, he's saying, and it should be made public. And the reason for this, and this is one of the implications, is because presumably the technology that we find in vehicles that come from another world, that world, whether it's from another world in this solar system, so local, or beyond this solar system, it's going to take a long time to get here, and they're not using internal combustion engines. These aren't, 8-cylinder V8s. They're not rocket engines, liquid fuel, solid fuel rocket engines. These are working on a physics that the mainstream academia are not teaching. On the one hand, on the other hand, it is a physics that has been known and is taught to selected people who are chosen to work on selected projects. I remember when I was in the industry during defense industry during Cold War, I know they would recruit people who excelled in mathematics at universities, high-end universities. And if they did really well in conventional math, then they'd be recruited to work for governmental agencies. And there is another math that they would be privileged to to learn and then to apply that math in technologies that aren't commonly acknowledged. So that's what's happening with Newsweek, June 3rd. And then the really big one that everyone, let's just put this on the map, everybody's talking about this now, June 6th in 2023, David Grush. He was a very credible intel officer, had a lot of security clearances, he was a former military, U.S. Air Force, I believe, a lot of credibility, went on mainstream through testimony under oath, congressional testimony, that the U.S. is two things. In possession, first, has a secret crash recovery program, number one. Number two, is in possession of non-human aircraft or non-human craft. And number three, in possession of non-human bodies, biological recovery. So this is kind of where things are right now. And you can see that it's not spontaneous. This is a directed rollout. Some people are calling this a soft disclosure, rather than boom, just coming out one day and saying we interrupt this program, for a special, like they do in the movies, for a special report, and you see, the Kremlin in Moscow and the president in the White House and leaders all over the world simultaneously making this announcement. That hasn't happened, and I don't know again that it will, because that would be a hard disclosure. This is soft disclosure, where it's coming out I believe, for a couple of reasons, soft disclosure. One, I think it is testing the public to see how the public responds to this. And number two, there appear to be different camps that have different visions and different agendas regarding disclosure, if it should happen at all. There's some that still don't want it to happen. Younger people are now coming into those jobs and those careers that have kept a lot of the secret, and older ones who signed those non-disclosures, including some of the former astronauts who signed the non-disclosures saying, we can't talk about what we experienced on the lunar surface. We can't talk about what happened when we were at the space station. Our pilots say, we can't talk about what happened on our reconnaissance missions. All of them believing that those non-disclosures were temporary. That surely, the astronauts, and I've had the opportunity to tour and to speak with and to know some of the former astronauts, and they all felt, it was the Cold War years. It was a different time, so disclosures were okay. Surely, by the end of their lifetimes, something this big would be made known because of the implications. It wasn't. And so now they are dying. They're on their deathbeds and they don't want to take the secret to the grave. So some of them in their, last days or last hours of life are revealing, what it is that is happening. Can you imagine? Can you imagine having a direct experience that could change forever the lives of every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth? Having that as a military man or a woman, so you're under oath and you're on your mission, and being forbidden from sharing something like this when you see the world in the condition that the world is in right now, and how this information could help the world and change the world in truly beautiful ways. Emotionally, what would that mean? And there are all kinds of stories. I had the opportunity from a conference at one time. I was leaving a conference going back to the airport, and I was sharing a van with a lot of women, and I didn't know who those women were. And it was a long drive from the city where the conference was back to the airport. And so we started talking, and they were astronauts' wives. And apparently there was something called the Astronauts' Wives Club, where they come together and console and comfort and support one another in difficult missions. And they were sharing among themselves what they had seen their husbands go through emotionally and psychologically, because most of them were not trained. This is a part of the training the military doesn't do a lot of. Emotionally, what do you do with that kind of information? And sadly, there are stories, and we've all heard this. This isn't a secret. It's very public. Many of them turn to drugs and alcohol to help desensitize them from the emotional pain and the mental pain and the psychological pain of not being able to share these extraordinary experiences, even with, they weren't supposed to share them with anyone, even with their spouses. So I had the opportunity to hear some of those stories. So the disclosure, we're in it. It's happening, and it has been happening. It's just happening on a little bit different level now. So I want to talk about a couple of different implications. Let me begin with the technological implication. We often hear about, although there are records of our interaction, the archaeological, anthropological, cultural records of our interaction with intelligence from beyond this world that go back thousands of years. It wasn't happening in the technological society that we have right now. So when we have those interactions in a technological society, it means something different. It means that we can up-level our technology. And that's exactly what began to happen. If you remember, back in the if you're old enough to remember back in the 50s and 60s, many of you know, I'm just giving an example, I'm a musician. And when I'm not doing what I'm doing now. And I remember my guitar amplifier in the late 1950s and early 1960s, when I'd put that amplifier on a stage and it was dark, behind that amp was lit up with this soft violet glow from the vacuum tubes that were called, and some of you musicians will know this, they're called 6L6 power vacuum tubes in the back of the amplifiers, in the head of, for example, a big Silvertone amplifier or something like that, because we were still living in the age where everything was running on vacuum tubes. Young people have never seen, young people today, I've been in audiences, they have no idea what a vacuum tube is. They've never seen them, because we live in a world of miniaturized components and printed circuits. And those are the result of reverse engineering in the 1950s and 60s that was happening from technology that was coming to this world. It either crashed or been brought down or landed intentionally, but was kept secret, kept under wraps. And it's really interesting how quickly we made that leap from vacuum tubes and the mysteries of life, and all of a sudden we had insights into DNA. All of a sudden we had insights into miniaturized technology, microcircuits, transistors, resistors, capacitors, without the vulnerability of those vacuum tubes. And this is one of the implications. So one of the concerns, people say, well, what would it mean if we had that disclosure? There's the technological implication. The moment that we have this disclosure, that we have technology from other intelligence, other civilizations, either other planets or other star systems, more likely. And it's not based on the burning of something to release the energy. All of our energy is based on, we burn something that has captured sunlight. Either it's coal or it's wood or it's the fossil fuels or whatever it is. But we have to destroy something to capture the energy to drive whatever it is we're going to be driving. Turbines for electricity, or automobiles, or whatever it is. Presumably the technology that has brought an intelligent form of life from another star system, it's not going to be based on that. It's going to be based upon fundamental principles of physics, drawing energy from the very foundation of the field that underlies all existence, something called the Planck field, named after Max Planck, the physicist, the early 20th century. And this is no secret. Again, we know this, and physicists work with this. Tiny fluctuations on the quantum level that can be captured, and those fluctuations, those movements, can be harnessed and amplified into meaningful forms of energy. The moment we do that, we no longer, think about what that means. We no longer need a fossil fuel. We don't need nuclear power. We don't need natural gas. We don't need gasoline in the tanks of our cars. We don't need to burn wood. We no longer need power lines to carry energy across our society, across our communities, our nations, our planet, under the oceans. communication changes, industries will change, and for some people, that change is frightening. And it's frightening because they're looking at it